So what are you? Cuban?
No,
I don't like Cubans.
that's so.
Maybe. Why, what do you care? You ain't Cuban.
Maybe I like Cubans.
There's no doubt Red Dead Redemption 2 has one of the greatest stories ever told within a video game. A story that tackles multiple themes from the eyes of Arthur Morgan, trusted and feared outlaw who unfortunately gets terminally sick, and alongside his failing health starts to watch his family slowly fall apart. To this day, I still replay this game's story, and I never quite get over watching the highs and lows of the Vanderlyn gang, changing up Arthur's appearance, trying to make him fat or skinny, and trying to change up whether if I'm going to be honorable or dishonorable. The overall experience is always changing for me, and there's always something new. But something that's always disappointed me with this game was the lack of some characters' presence in the main story of the game. They were just there, not really having much to add to major story decisions, or although there are some small moments where you can go out and rob a stagecoach, homestead, or even go out fishing and hunting with them on your own time, it's not a recurrent theme. It's just a one and done deal. You're not able to invite any character you're choosing out on an activity of your choosing, similar to how you can do so in the GTA series, which is a really sad omission given how much rich story and background that can be provided for each and every one of the Vanderlyn members. I mean, sure, you can hear about their personal lives and where they're at currently within the game by just paying attention to dialogue that's going in and around the camp between them and other characters, but it would have been so much better if you can just take any character that you wanted at any given time, invite them to go fishing, hunting, or shoot up a town and hear about their past and how they even fell into the Vanderlyn gang, or comment on the current situation that the gang is in now. That would have also given a lot more insight to the overall gang and not just individual characters within the gang. We pretty much always hear Dutch will find a way, or Dutch has a plan. Most members, while a little cynical of the current situation or past events leading to their current predicament they find themselves in, the overall sentiment is still a firm belief in Dutch. A firm belief that at times seems almost blindly ignorant. Think of how we would really see what the gang's hierarchy is like, or how information from Dutch and other members that are aware of the current events and what is really going on right now is trickled down and brought to other members' attention. As an example, let's take a look at Clemens Point. With the exception of Beaver Hollow, I feel like Clemens Point is one of the more eventful chapters where the gang is just in the center of so much going on. In this chapter, we find Dutch, Hosea, and Arthur leading the way of trying to get in the good graces of both the Braithwaites and Greys by simultaneously exploiting their hatred for the other. While these are the three main figures driving the action taken between both families, Javier, Bill, Sean, and John are all brought in at one time or another to ensure a particular job is achieved. In Red Dead Redemption 2, as we are all aware of, we are able to complete certain jobs before others. Imagine having the ability to invite Javier out on a homestead or train robbery, and on the way to the location, we find out how much or how little Bill played a role in taking out the Braithwaites' moonshining operation out in the swamps. And through this interaction, we're given more insight to Arthur's perspective on this particular event, what's going on with Dutch, Hosea, the Braithwaites, Greys, or instead of bringing Javier along, taking Charles, Sadie, Pearson, someone who's not directly involved with any of the missions during this chapter. Hearing how Arthur is sharing information to them that isn't supposed to be immediately known by them would show how members who aren't directly involved get their information, if they're even actually told what's really going on, and hear of Dutch and the others doing outside of camp. By controlling how someone hears information and seeing how it's communicated to them would also show how certain information may or may not be intentionally withheld with the purpose of pushing a particular narrative. Maybe the omission of seeing interactions like this is just meant to purely hammer home that everyone within the Vanderlyn gang just trusts Dutch and are hopeful of his good intentions. But going back to what I was saying earlier, if you're lucky, a character may be slowly used more and more to have a bigger presence, such as Sadie, who's largely absent until the later half of the game when she starts to get closer to Arthur, and then she starts to take a much more proactive role within the gang and even her own personal life. Or Charles, who, in an effort to combat Dutch's eager willingness to exploit the vulnerability and anger of the Wapiti Indians during the events of Beaver Hollow, starts to be given a little bit more of the spotlight. A spotlight expanded a little more with him and Uncle being the last remnants of John's outlaw days. Sadie and Charles, I wish, had more to do with the game in the earlier part of the story. I think when it comes to characters that people wish they saw more of, it's always Charles and Sadie that are at the top of that list. And rightfully so. Charles especially is a very interesting character to me particularly, but what I was saying at the beginning of this video was the narrative of Red Dead Redemption 2 is so massive, it's so complex. It's got to push the story forward while incorporating the many different personalities, the many different characters of the Vanderlyn gang. I believe there's 20 something members in total. So not only does Rockstar got to build their individual relationships to Arthur particularly since he is the protagonist, but they have to tie it to even John, considering that this game is a prequel. And there's many questions that the story of this game had to answer coming into it, on top of their role within the gang. All these different personalities, all their strengths, the weaknesses, their relationship from one person to the other, and of course the protagonist and later protagonists, and then the many different antagonists. And I was saying, if they can't achieve having a bigger presence of all these characters in every single mission or in the story as a whole, they could have compensated for the lack of it by allowing you to take these characters out on your own volition and get specific details or specific perspectives on these outings that you're able to initiate on your own volition. But besides Sadie and Charles, the two characters that always bugged me for not being much more present is Javier Escuella and Bill Williamson, two of the major antagonists of the original Red Dead Redemption. Arguably, the purpose of them in Red Dead Redemption 2 ultimately was getting a glimpse of their general position within the gang, their relationship to Dutch and John, which technically we got at least their position within the gang, with Bill constantly being made fun of and is considered to be a fool more than anything.
Hey, Bill, you were a sharpshooter in the cavalry, weren't you?
What?
When we get there, maybe you could help with the suppression fire.
I never said I was no sharpshooter.
Oh, that's right. What was it? The nation's most loyal latrine digger, wasn't that it?
And while I don't recall how Javier is looked at by other members, the fact he and Bill are basically resigned from the main events, with Bill's opinion completely being disregarded, and Javier's position towards most of what goes on is really more reflective of a hired gun, thankful for Dutch accepting him into the family, and a gratitude that's repaid with unwavering loyalty to Dutch because of the roles that both of them play. It takes a lot of that impact, the betrayal Arthur and John feel towards them at the end of the game, with them siding with Dutch versus them two. Yes, you can rob a stagecoach with Bill, a homestead with Javier, and apparently you can even go fishing with Javier. At least that's what I've heard. I've never had that prompt pop up in my camp, but besides that, there's even a chance encounter where you can help Javier free Bill from the captivity of a few bounty hunters. But ultimately, the story is devoid of any noteworthy moments between the two of them and Arthur, or the two of them and John. On one hand, I am glad of the story and events Rockstar chose to give us and didn't lazily put this on the back of Javier, Bill, and Dutch, but I still would have loved more missions involving them, at least showcasing a moment or two that held some meaning, making their impact much more significant. The only such moment I can think of is when Arthur has a severe coughing episode and Bill defends him from Micah.
Better watch your goddamn mouth, boy! Or... Take it easy, cowboy. You're gonna do yourself a mischief where you're heading. Micah, shut it! He started it!
Had there been more moments like this from Javier or Bill, and the moments where Bill is showcased, less of it being him the butt of the joke and him actually showing that he's at the very least aggressive. Maybe he's not intelligent, maybe he's not all that much respected, but at least at the end of the day he can showcase some type of aggression and defensiveness towards other members that he highly respects. If there was more moments like even this by Javier or Bill, that would have been very significant. That would have added so much more to the dynamic. That would have added so much more depth where, yes, even though Bill is the butt of the joke, even by Arthur the majority of the time, and Javier really doesn't pay that much attention to the other members of the gang, this would have at least shown some type of emotional involvement that isn't even there. It would have added more to the sadness of the gang falling apart, and it would have added at least a little bit more sentiment and feelings behind the scenes of how John now has to hunt down Bill or Javier, who maybe at one point in time during the story, if Rockstar had implemented it, saved his life or Arthur's life, similar to the way that Kieran saved Arthur's life at 6 Point Cabin. I just feel ultimately when it boils down to Bill and Javier, so much more should have been done with the both of them. I understand they didn't have to be the front and center of everything, but it would have been nice to have at least one or two moments where there was some type of connection between them and Arthur or them and John. But let me know what you think. What are your feelings towards Bill or Javier? Do you feel like they were used enough? Too little? Too much? Who's a character that you wish had a bigger impact in the story?